the machine learning development Standup. So unfortunately, Louis is on today, but Jake and I are here as always. We're joined with John and Diego, who work on .NET Interactive, and they're going to talk a bit about that after the community link. I think we might have talked about notebooks a few times on the community stand-up, but we'll go more in depth and show you, how pretty much how cool it is. And I'm sure you'll see by Jake's enthusiasm how much he loves .NET Interactive and notebooks as we go through. But we will start first with some community links, and then I'll have John and Diego introduce themselves after our community links, and then they can get into it. And of course, as always, feel free to post comments or questions in the chat. So to start off with, we've got our URL list here, and we'll paste that in the chat in a bit. And it will also be a part of the stream, the recording summary or link. And let me make that full screen so you can all see it. Maybe. Cool. So first thing from Rubik's Code, from our good friend Nicola, who has been on the stream before. We have machine learning with ML.NET, specifically NLP or natural language processing with BERT. So BERT is a type of NLP model, and this article goes into how you can actually use BERT in ML.NET. So as always, it's really detailed, great article, gets into the background of things. He defines a lot of great things and then actually shows you how to implement that in ML.NET. You can see here, it goes into the code, and then I'm trying to see if there's penguins in this one, but I don't think there's penguins in this one. So if you're used to the penguins, don't expect them for the NLP, but I guess that makes sense because penguins don't talk, so it's fine. So yeah, so if you want to learn how to do some natural language processing with BERT and ML.NET, check out this article. And Nicola has been super busy. He also worked on another sentiment analysis, or I guess kind of natural language processing, but specifically sentiment analysis with ML.NET. So again, this one goes into IMDb movie ratings and the sentiment of those and predicting the sentiment of those. So you can check that out. And he does a code first approach here. So yeah, so you can check these out. These will be on the URL list, and we'll URL link. We'll post that in the chat soon. Then this one, so this is going back to basics. It's how to build an ML.NET pipeline. But this is nice because it kind of shows the loop of how machine learning works, where you get your data, you train your model, you evaluate, in this kind of this cycle here, and how you do that in machine learning. So how you do that with ML.NET. So it talks about model composition, the actual pipeline, and what different things in the pipeline mean, and then shows different ways that you can do it with different settings. And yeah, so it's a pretty simple one, but it's nice because it links to a bunch of different terminology that you might not know or want to dig into, and different parts of the API as well. Then we've got this ML to AI with ML.NET in Azure. So this is another sentiment analysis example using Model Builder. But what's cool about this is that it actually goes all the way. So first it builds it with Model Builder, and then it shows how you can add a web API, and then it will show you all the way up through actually deploying that to Azure. So usually we stop kind of at the locally trying out the model, but this one is actually deploying to Azure and showing you how you can deploy a web API to Azure and then consume a model that way. So check that one out if you want to see how an easy way to deploy ML models or ML.NET models. And then from our good friend Daniel Costea, he created the smart labeling classification data sets that uses deep learning and ML.NET. So there's a video here that you can watch on Psisharp Corner. And then he also actually did, and that was part of the IoT virtual conference that he did. So a talk that he did that was recorded. And then he also did an AMA about ML.NET. So this one's just a recording on YouTube. And this one was interesting. I know I saw a question about, will ML.NET ever, be faster than Python and other questions like that. So if you're interested in that, check out Daniel Costea's AMA on ML.NET, which of course stands for Ask Me Anything. All right, and then virtual ML.NET Community Conference is coming up. So a little bit of the history there. Last year, Alexander Slate and John Wood Twitter saying, we wish there was an all ML.NET community conference. just like an all ML.NET conference, and they decided to get together and actually plan out this conference. And they reached out to, or I think I actually saw, it was either Alexander or John's tweet, and I said, hey, I'd love to, help set this up. So Alexander, John, Louise, and I ended up co-organizing the virtual ML.NET community conference, which was obviously all virtual. So we did that last March, I think, or May, I can't remember. And it was awesome, like great success. So many people tuned in, kind of like blew away our expectations. So of course we decided to make it an annual thing. And actually in that, I think November, we did a kind of an extension of it. We did a hackathon. And now this is going to be the second annual ML.NET community conference, May 7th and 8th. And we have the schedule posted. So I wanted to show off some of the really cool talks. We had like a ton of submissions, so we actually had a hard time narrowing them down. There's so many good submissions, and I think those that didn't make it, we want to have on the community stand-up at some point, so we can still get a chance to see their content. But here's what's coming up for community, or for this virtual MLnet community conference. So we'll start off with, and this is Pacific time, so it's actually starting 10 a.m. Eastern time. JK is going to start us off with just an intro to ML.NET for those who are not familiar with it, and that will kind of kickstart the conference for them so they can understand the more advanced topics. Then Priyanka is going to talk about ML.NET and BERT, which I mentioned earlier. So this is creating a Q&A bot for financial sentiment analysis. And then Rafal is going to talk about enhancing back office operations with ML.NET. Gregor, who I see just joined the stream, it will be tackling machine learning systems and vertical slices. So for all the F# enthusiasts out there, he will be doing F# and interactive notebooks, which we will talk about in a little bit. And then Michael will be talking about using ML.NET and Xbox, which is awesome because I haven't seen any samples like that yet. So super excited for that. Then Arafat will talk about some object detection with ML.NET. Bruno is going to talk about this one. I love the title. Let's perform anomaly detection using ML.NET on a drone flying data from Azure IoT. So that one I am very excited for. I mean, all of them I am, but that one is definitely very intriguing. So those are the ones on Friday. On Saturday, we've also got some awesome talks. So again, kind of a more intro talk from Anupama, which is using AutoML and ML.NET. Then we've got Alexander talking about learning ML.NET with .NET Interactive, which you'll get a little sneak peek of today. And then Mikal is talking about predicting F1 race strategies using ML.NET. Marco talking about the model lifecycle and integrating with Azure DevOps, which is super important and a hot topic right now in the machine learning world, is that kind of MLOps integration. Daniel Casea will be talking about consuming ML.NET native models by writing almost no lines of code using the Roslyn code generation. That's another one that intrigued me, not something that I've seen someone do before. Then Luis will be talking about, if you've seen that rock, paper, scissors example that's been done in .NET, he'll be doing something similar using ML.NET for the machine learning portion. And then Faisal will be talking about lessons learned in moving a data science project to product. So he actually wrote an article not too long ago about this. So, and maybe I'll try and add that article link to, I think we've added it before to the URL list, but I'll add it again. So he'll talk about kind of that journey there. So yeah, so awesome talks. I'll get the URL list after I am finished presenting all the links. I'll make sure to get that in the chat for you. And the last thing here is just the .NET Interactive repo. We just want to make sure that you'll have access to that. I'm not going to go too much into it because that's what John and Diego are here for, but this will be here for easy access. And once I pass it over to John and Diego, I will post that link in the chat. Cool. So that is my portion done with the community links, as it's taking a second to switch over to the next view. There we go. Awesome. So John and Diego, do you want to do a quick intro and then we can get into all the .NET Interactive stuff?
Sure, thanks. I'm John Sakura. I am the engineering lead for the .NET Interactive project. And I get to write some code on it sometimes too, which is fun. Diego?
Yeah, hello. I'm Diego. I'm a software engineer in the .NET Interactive. I was just putting wax on the head to make it more shining for the show. because it's important, the first impression. And I actually get to write the code, not like John, but we paid a lot. But
Diego also often has very good intro music. I was kind of let down this time that you didn't rock in on the way in, but we're glad to have
I've been told that I shouldn't play metal in a meeting.
Well, maybe at the end if we have some extra time.
Okay, you're on.
Awesome.
So,
I'll
give a little bit of
sharing
background.
your screen.
I'm going to share the screen, and I see that we got the additional team member. Howard is in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
We got,
Hello, Howard.
yeah, it's
I see, Brett has joined us.
yeah, and
Brett, what do you think?
yeah, Howard
His
is. We're gonna show a few things from his company. Especially, it's quite important and very interesting things that they do with notebooks, data, live data, and AI, and machine learning and insights. It is I'm gonna then start sharing the screen. I got quite a few cool things from them.
So I just wanted to give a second's background for .NET Interactive for folks who might not be familiar with the project. It grew out of the Try.net project, which enough people said this looks like the kind of technology that could be applied to, and Try.net is embedded coding samples in Psisharp in the web. You'll see it a bunch of places in docs.microsoft.com. And the similarities to Jupyter notebooks came up often enough that we said, well, we could probably build a Jupyter experience, which people are asking for. And it's kind of a missing piece in a lot of the data prep, data exploration, ML kinds of workflows, right? People use notebooks a lot. It's something that is very, very popular in Python. And we also saw that it had a connection to learning experiences, interactive documentation, classroom learning. It makes it easier to kind of dig in and start playing with code without having to fire up Visual Studio or understand, the SDK deeply, for example. So it's just a nice way to kind of to jump in. And so the way that we built it from the ground up was in this sort of multi-language paradigm that is kind of a little bit novel. But inside of .NET Interactive notebooks, you can do C#, you can do F#, you can do PowerShell. So we call these subkernels. There are multiple languages that are running inside the same notebook. You can do HTML, JavaScript, and you can bring your own languages as well. Via NuGet extensions, you can bring in custom visualizations. You can bring in custom languages, new subkernels. We just put out a preview that we worked on with the Azure Data team, which allows you to do T-SQL inside of the notebook. We have very experimental early phase support for SQLite as well. Right, so this Polyglot experience lets you pull data from a lot of different places and start to mix and match in one workflow, right? And experiment and prototype, and so it's a really this is still an early experience. We want feedback on it, and one of the things that I want to highlight, especially as Diego starts getting into some of the demos, is we've really built this for you to be able to bring your own experiences to it, right? Custom visualizations is a big part of that. Custom libraries that when you install a NuGet package actually change the behavior of the notebook in terms of languages, in terms of connectability, in terms of visualizations, plotting, things like that. So with that in mind, as we go through this, think about what you would want to build on this platform, because it's a very, very flexible platform.
Yep. I'm ready. Kind of.
Okay.
That's okay.
Kind of.
Yeah, I'm not.
Right.
You'll find out. John was mentioning about the polyglot, right? The multiple language. These is very important for exploration, because not one language is able to let you get the same perspective or the full perspective on the data. So that's why usually you got this flow between some kind of processing or business logic language, C#, F#, some automation, but then you need to present it. That's where the classic HTML and JavaScript comes in. But one of the things that you can see here is that I have a C# cell. Kernel is being bootstrapped. I create a div, and now I'm using this API to actually retrieve the value of this from a C# kernel get it into JavaScript, and then populate the output. This is kind of cool. The thing that is not cool is that because of the nature of a notebook, now this cell got scattered. So I ran this one, and this one updated this one. So that I'm not really intentional about what these things should do. So now at this point, one of the things that becomes important there is that with an interactive, we don't really understand cell. And the polyglot or multi-language, for us, is normal to be performed even at a single cell level. So that's why I can say in this single cell, this is HTML. This part here is going to be JavaScript. I got mechanical keyboard. Now, when I do this one, is a single execution, but the output and everything would be done. Unexpected JSON input. I broke it. There you go. Sorry. At this point, what's happening is that I had one single cell, and finally I get the whole thing that produces the output that I wanted in one single block. So this is one of the first things that we wanted to light up, and being able to group code by intent, processing versus display. The other thing that becomes quite interesting then is that you start loading data, and data come in all sorts of form, right? You can load it from a database, you can load it from a file, it can come in many forms. And one of the things that we built is a way for us to start bringing in data from what we call a value kernel. In this case, for example, I'm gonna load an extension. An extension, like John mentioned, is a way we not only load NuGet package, that's the normal thing that we do. You've seen in other videos on the community stand-up, where through this mechanism, we're also bringing in extension that modify the tooling, visualization, add new languages, and add new behavior to the system. And now I'm gonna load this package, and this is gonna introduce language. There's a new kernel and a few other tools. But I think it's important here is that how I'm going to load this JSON file is that I can use hashbang value to actually get that value in. But even more interesting is that, look at this one. I can now share it back into Psisharp, parse it, and visualize. Now, this visualization, the Explore with Interact, was brought in through the extension. At this point, I've got this tool, and with this tool, I can start going around and poke the aspect of the data. Sometimes that's not what you get. And then, for example, like the server log, I've got a bunch of things, and let's say I can even import the server log. Instead of importing that from file, I may want to actually have a literal JSON. At this point, it's easier because I don't need to think about quoting, escaping. This is just letting me put JSON object, CSV file, and so on. And then we keep on going. Finally, same way, I can now bring a new language in, and we can look at this one where we start bringing in the ability to connect to an MS SQL database. And this has been contributed by the Azure Data Studio friends. This one gives us now a new ability to connect to a SQL through this magic command, give it a name, and also ask it to create a DB context. Again, in this multi-language scenario, sometimes you want to control flow and code. Sometimes you really want just to share data and things across different languages. At this point, if I got SQL, what this can do is inject immediately into the .NET side of the world. It's going to create for me the entity framework context on the fly for this database. And is adding this new language. What this means is that now in this cell, I've got SQL. The thing is, being a language, now I've got access to the database. I've got access to the intelligence and all those things. I run. And I got my table. And I got visualization. This one, for example, it was a AdventureWorks. It's showing me a join on categories. I see for each categories of merchandise and products, what do I have? But this is not always enough. I had a bunch of JSON. I had a SQL. Now the problem is that I need to use these two different data sources to filter, right? And at this point, what I'm trying to do is that from the JSON that I built before, which is the user report, you can see that we're reporting complaint in this example where they were complaining about URI. And at the end of URI, I've got an ID, which looks like an ID of a product. So I can now filter that one and then use this set of products to actually create a query. And now that I've got a query, I can go and explore these elements. So we can look at that as a table and so on. This is because really visualizing, exploring, loading, merging, and playing around, pivoting, and slicing the data, it is really paramount, especially in machine learning, data exploration kind of workloads. Having the right tool that lets you tap into the most appropriate language and tool subset really boosts your productivity. So now I've been using the SQL when I had to do SQL, JSON access for doing file manipulation. One thing that then we've been working with friends over to Microsoft Research is that we tapped into another rich visualization, and this is Sundance, which I'm going to show you even more interesting in another example later. The whole point here, though, is that the Net Interactive is making all of these visualization that are portable. You're looking at them now here in VS Code. They work exactly the same way in, name it, Jupyter Notebook, Jupyter Lab, whatever you want. All these are HTML and JavaScript. And then again, because we handle all those languages, we can really make all the system work seamlessly. And then we add just this display, which is essentially telling the system that you want to produce some form of output. And one thing I'm going to show you is also some API that we've got, which is about formatting, where it is going to let us take into some specific type and attach code generation and way to display. So in this case, the only thing I did is that data is not queryable, and what this thing is able to do is to translate that into a table kind of object, and tables object can be displayed, a CSV or a table or a tabular object can be easily displayed by both Interact and Sundance. Any question? Notebooks are good? Yeah.
We have one question. Are there any getting started tutorials for .NET Interactive?
Yes. So if you go onto our repo, you can see them in Binder, or to be fairly honest, if you clone it and you go down to the sample folder, we have a bunch of notebooks for all the languages that we support, including Polyglot, which I'm going to show you. These are all notebooks that they go to either documenting the API, like this one, for example, talks about the formatting part, or they show you more complex samples like ML.NET or integration with a few other things. So this one, you get them down, you get to run, and this is showing how what kind of surface, an API you've got to create and interact with HTML from Psisharp, from PowerShell, and from F#.
Awesome. And I shared the link in the chat to the repo. So if you go to samples, you should be able to find some of the getting started notebooks there. And there is something, I'll actually add this one as well. So the VS Code.NET Interactive extension you can download just right through VS Code. I also post it in the marketplace. So that's a super easy way to get started there. Is through the VS Code extension. So I'll type that in the chat. And we have a few other...
One second.
I
have to disable an extension. 1 second.
Gotcha. Well, while you are doing that, we've got another question. So Howard has asked, can you explain how that Sundance component is included in the notebook? .NET Interactive extensibility is pretty powerful.
So the Sundance component is actually is a .NET extension, and the .NET extension is a NuGet package. When extension get loaded, they can bring back few things, code, but also bring static content. So this is a JavaScript, pretty much, component that gets loaded. And because of the way we interop with JavaScript and the front end, the extension itself is bringing along the JavaScript and HTML of Sundance. And when you call at this point explore Sundance, sorry?
I'd like to sort of pop up a level on what the extension story is. I think this is one of the things that we want to highlight, is because we want to point out that, and this is kind of what Howard is getting at, right? Is it's really easy to write one of these extensions. So at the most basic level, what you're seeing here, this visualization as well as the extension methods that trigger it, they're not built into .NET Interactive in any way. They are they're coming in via a NuGet package. Right, so the NuGet package contains a library that has a few extension methods on iQueryable, IEnumerable, things like that. And it has some bundled up JavaScript. And so what happens is when the extension loads, if the NuGet package has resources in a specific location inside of it, .NET Interactive knows to look at them there and says, let me see, you've got an iKernel extension implementation, and we pass the kernel into you, and then you have access to the programmatic. You have access to the APIs for the kernel itself and for .NET Interactive. You can do all kinds of things from there. The very simplest example would be a custom formatter. Right? I don't know. Do you want to demonstrate just like the basic how to register a custom formatter? Right. And so another thing, in the docs link that we have there's a folder for extensions, and we have a few example extensions in there. We could show one of those, or we could just show some of the building blocks, which you can use these extensibility APIs directly in the notebook as well. So you don't if you just have some custom formatting that you want to do in your notebook, you don't want to go build an extension and a NuGet package for it. You can just do it right inside of a cell.
Yeah. And this, for example, is a very simple one, right? So we got one type, which is this person class that we just define here. Then we define few object with that. By default, that's how they will come out. But then you can start building formatters where you want to say at this point that you, instead of printing, look at this one, I was printing a list like this. This one is just saying, you know what, I'm going to just print person.
Yeah. Or you can do something that's more graphical as well. Why don't we, the one that I always find to be kind of entertaining is with Giphy, but embedding that inside of C# is a little bit trickier. But yeah, you can, one of the things here, the basic output from our formatters is attempting to show you the object graph, right? Is what is or the data that's contained in some data structure, right? Just some minimally useful thing that lets you say, hey, what's in here? Now, C# doesn't have the concept of printers the way that F# Interactive does. We are working on a change to the formatter infrastructure that'll allow each kernel to have its own separate formatters, but right now they're global. And when that happens, the F# formatters will be the more familiar FSI style text output. But so what you see here is kind of across all .NET types, can we infer a formatter for you, but you can always specify your own. And we also have an HTML DSL that allows you an easier way to write HTML than just doing strings, and it'll get the encodings correctly, and it kind of lets you do nested tags and things like that. It's called Pocket View. And so if you look under the hood for a lot of our extensions, you'll see that Pocket View is actually the thing that's being used without having to embed Razor, for example. But we did have a community. There's a community extension out there that actually adds Razor support to .NET Interactive. So that's something to go out there and check out as well. But yeah, the ability to do HTML easily in order to create custom formatters is the foundation of what you're seeing with Sundance and the other visualizations that we're showing.
Yeah, for example, what I want to show is this is another custom behavior that we add, which is is another way to format things, and then we're going to do a display of this. So what this one does, for example, is that it's using an extension that as a custom formatter for type, which we usually have a default one, which is like the one that John showed you. But this one,
but the type one's a little different, actually.
Oh, the type is cool. So let me show the type first.
Show the type one first, and then we can kind of,
So if I got the type, the default behavior would be
try string. That one's not gonna. That link's not gonna go.
Oh, that's not. Yeah, that's we don't have that thing, right?
This is these are pieces that we'll start to build these out in more detail. But this is a good example here of the kinds of things you can do with like what's a sensible HTML output representation for a given type in .NET. So our default, as we try to generate a link to documentation, we'll make that one smart enough in time, hopefully, to know when there's documentation available or not via the docs APIs. But right now, we just sort of make the assumption that that link will take you somewhere.
Well, this one is adding now a custom formatter, same API that was in the just a bit more code. But at the end, it's building now a DOM. And actually, that one is not even building a DOM. It's building a Mermaid Markdown. And the Mermaid Markdown gets rendered as a UML diagram. Mermaid, again, is a language that was brought in through the extension. And the only thing that one really does is that it can render markdowns into different types of diagram. So in this case, the thing that becomes interesting is that in the formatter API, where you are allowed to do anything that you want, what type of MIME type you're going to display. In that case, we do a hope where we actually format a type as another language, and then we let that language take over and be formatted as this HTML. And that language is quite interesting because then it lets you explore object, especially if you got like time series or things like that. With Mermaid is a classic tool that gets used to express like interaction diagrams. So imagine if you were to explore some form of logging where you got a hierarchical, I don't know, something like a tracing telemetry from your app. With that one, you could inspect how the computation was flowing and use that information.
So Diego, we actually have a few questions in the chat. So one from Roman: can you hide code scripts and leave only markdown text with charts? What's the most convenient way to export or publish results as a single readable document?
So this one is, I think there's a lot of different answers to this one that are available. In the IPYNB file extension captures all of the outputs, right? This is the Jupyter format. So even though we're not Python, we're using the Jupyter format because the tooling ecosystem around this is fairly rich. So there are tools like NBConvert and PanDoc and so on that let you do certain kinds of publishing. Right? PanDoc is kind of this great Swiss Army knife for going from one format to another. So you just to PowerPoint or for Markdown or things like that. For sort of richer things, especially if you publish something that's interactive, so the published output maybe has widgets that people can use to adjust the view. It's not just so stacked. Those kind of outputs. One really great product for this, and we haven't played with it a lot yet, but it's well worth being aware of, is Plotly Dash. Plotly is the most popular JavaScript visualization library. People are probably familiar with it. Plotly just added their own support for an F# API. And, of course, you can use that with C# as well. Their documentation is great. And they have an extension for .NET Interactive, which, again, it uses this exact same infrastructure that we've just been describing with Sundance and with Mermaid to let you directly render the Plotly objects the same way that you've been seeing here. So you can evaluate a Plotly object and you'll get an interactive plot back. And what Plotly, this is kind of, for them, it's building towards a .NET experience for Plotly Dash, which is for building interactive dashboards. So being able to publish something for people to consume who don't necessarily care about the code, they really want to see the visualizations.
Now, this is a second take on the. This is the notebook that you got available on the GitHub. Is the ML.NET with a couple of takes with the thing that we were showing before. So in this case, we're going to use the data frame object to load the housing CSV. And here you can see that there is no default render. I don't know anything about the one, and there is no extension. So at this point, to be able to see in a little bit more interesting way, I define straight in the notebook an HTML formatter so that when I have a data frame, I can display as a table. Then I want to load that from the internet, and I'm using the hashbank value kernel and load that CSV file. Now I make sure that I share that with C#, and now pretty much I'm loading, and that's the custom format that was just wrote, is displaying a first chunk of the data.
And that custom formatter also gives you a sense of the Pocket View HTML DSL.
Yes, which is all used here. This building this is the DSL from Pocket View. It's the table header, and then it's binding that to the name, and then, as you can see, is adding the table data and is adding the table rows. And then finally it's building the whole body.
Another thing that's worth a footnote here is that all of these individual pieces of functionality, like this formatter infrastructure, is a standalone library that you can grab. It's Microsoft.NET Interactive formatting, and the kernels themselves also are available as NuGet packages. So a lot of the infrastructure here of just at its core, .NET Interactive is an engine for sending code in and getting results out, and the notebook extension sits on top of that and provides some of the additional. It gives you a display surface. But if you just want code evaluation, or you want to be able to do something else with the outputs, you can also use this as a scripting engine.
Yeah.
We've got actually some more questions. Lots of questions coming in. From Alexander, curious if language server is used and if intelligence works.
Yep. Yeah. So language server. If you mean the language server protocol, the answer is no, not yet, because the language server protocol doesn't allow this mixing of languages inside of one buffer like what you're seeing here. But Diego, you can show some of this. The language, and when you build your own kernel, like the Mermaid kernel, for example, it might be worth showing the code for that as well, just to show how simple it is. It's a very
it could take ages. It's very long. That's gonna.
And this is. To go back to the theme of building your own extensibility, the C# kernel, there's a bunch of different commands. The entire API surface is modeled as commands and events, and you can send them over JSON, or you can use them. You can reference our packages directly and bind to them directly in .NET. Either way will work. So you'll see here, on line 10, the iKernel command handler of submit code. Right, that's the most basic common one. When you run a cell. That's the event or the command that gets sent. But there's other ones as well. So if you look at the C# kernel, for example, you'll see that there's other commands that it handles, and those include support for things like completions, hover text, signature help. Right? These are different language service kinds of gestures, and all that functionality is built right into .NET Interactive. And if you build a custom kernel, you can opt into whichever of those makes sense. So the backing implementation, in this case, it's Roslyn scripting for C#. The backing implementation for F# is FSI, F# Interactive, and so on. when you saw also that we have IntelliSense support for T-SQL over the schema, right? So the backing implementation there is an executable called the SQL tool service that comes in via the NuGet package, and that's the same. It's the same executable that is used by the Azure Data Studio to talk to a bunch of different kinds of databases that speak different languages. So we'll see more support for that light up over time. And so that's how IntelliSense works in .NET Interactive.
Awesome. Next one from Heather. Can I run this terminal on Android?
Wait.
I'm assuming.
Go ahead, Jake.
Oh, I'm assuming they're asking if they can like run the notebook interactive experience on Android. I'm not sure.
Heather, maybe if you want to clarify. Yeah, exactly.
And
so then Alexander said, would be nice if we can load an external project without publishing it to NuGet, like add type in PowerShell. I think Howard actually responded to that, but I can let Diego and John also talk about it a bit.
you can, so the hash, the PoundR thingy that we do is either loading a NuGet package. But here you see that I'm adding sources, so you don't need to publish. Quite a few times I've got packages that I build and I keep local on my machine. So I just add a PoundI, C column, whatever, package source, and then I load it. Or you can actually do like Howard is saying, you can, if you've got a DLL, you can just do the PoundR, and then you give the path to the DLL. And that, for example, what is it? I've got one here, like this one. In this case, for example, I don't have a NuGet package, but I need to import a couple of DLLs to parse event tracing information and logs from and a dump trace from an app. The only thing I want to have is having some way to plot, but then I do this to bring in DLL that I built from my project without having to publish. This I hope this is the answer.
Yeah. And if you have any other questions about that, Alexander, feel free to post in the chat. And then we have another Alexander, or Alexandre, not sure. Can I use notebooks in VS 2019?
That's for John.
Yeah, John, do you want to answer that?
So we have an open issue on this, which I was just going to go and find the link to, and Jake opened it. So maybe Jake wants to have a shot at this one as well. We are trying to define what that would mean and what it would look like, but it's definitely an area of investigation.
Yeah, I don't think I have too much to add. I think that we can see kind of what the power of that might be. If that's something you'd like, we will post to the issue and tell us how you'd want to use it and why you'd want it in VS 2019 or the future versions of VS. But right now, it's an area of interest, but we would love some feedback on it.
And I'll try and find the link to that issue and post it in the chat. Okay, so we have one from, I don't think I've asked this one yet, from Nathan. Is this just for manual analysis, or does this somehow get published and used within the process of production application? Which is a great question, because we have a lot of people ask, like, how, like, I understand how to explore with this, but then how do I actually use this in production? Or do I use this in production?
Yeah, so this is an interesting area. The Papermill project, which some people might be familiar with, exists for notebook automation. And in theory, it works with .NET Interactive. I know that adapters were contributed by the community for Papermill. Now, Papermill requires you to run, it works by editing code cells to make them automatable, to define parameters that can be passed in at runtime. And then, of course, it relies on Python and Jupyter installation on your machine to run it. So this might not be entirely ideal for .NET developers. We've had this scenario in mind. And so if you look, there's an area automation tag in the .NET Interactive repo. And there's a few issues there that describe some of our thinking about how we might want to do this and how we think it might work. And it's definitely something that we want people's feedback on and thoughts about. But one of the things that we're thinking about doing there is to allow you to publish a notebook as a command line or web app. Now, there's a lot of complexity to how that might work. Under the hood, it would probably use the .NET Interactive NuGet packages programmatically. So we would generate calls to our NuGet packages in order to preserve some of the polyglot behaviors. We're thinking through what the authoring experience might look like and so on. And then that would also allow us to if we identify how you want to parameterize the notebook, then we can express the parameters to the notebook as command line parameters for command line help effectively, and then validate that the inputs are correct and that required inputs are being passed, and then use the variable sharing feature that Diego was showing to make sure that those parameters get propagated to all of the kernels that need them. So that's kind of a hand wavy answer. It's something we're looking at, and we really want to hear how people would like to use that experience and what would be useful in it and things.
And today there is also an internal point that has been a long discussion with John, and it's about this word here. The fact that the even through this manual process, you might want to have a manual way to discover, but then whatever knowledge you have captured in this selection that you've done, you might want to be able to get that part as your production pipeline. So you have visually found the pattern, but now you want to move from this cell and leverage this, filtering, or if I were to find an interesting, feature in this level, you might want to have some of the tool that you use it interactively to actually help you build that at authoring stage. And now you've got this automation that keeps reusing what you've just defined.
Awesome. So Heather actually is back and clarified that they want to know they can run notebooks on Android. Specifically, the platforms they're looking at are Motorola Power 2021 and Xbox First Gen.
Xbox First Gen. Ooh. I'd go for a strict no. Xbox First Gen. This is .NET 5, and I don't think that there is any build on for the Motorola processor that was running on those.
Gotcha. So Heather, hopefully that answered your question. Obviously, you're always free to open an issue if there's something you want to investigate further. But I'd love to hear more about your scenario.
Wherever .NET 5 goes, the whole ecosystem can work. Now, the thing that doesn't mean that you can't have a .NET Interactive compliant kernel on those machines. Because John was talking about the fact that the kernel, so here you're looking at the notebook, right? The whole end-to-end. The UI in this case is provided, so that the whole user interface is provided by VS Code. .NET Interactive per se is able to understand a set of commands and a set of and produce a set of events. That's what the engine does. The kernels, you've seen quite a few, like .NET. They execute through Roslyn or FSI, and anyway, .NET 5 at this point. No one is preventing you to have a compliant tool. Like the SQL, for example, he understands, he's talking to a tool via a JSON RPC. So you could still have an equivalent execution engine for the kernel implemented for those platforms without having to port the whole .NET 5 and then expose those machines as kernels.
Gotcha. So
that's interesting.
Yeah,
I would like to know the scenario a little bit more. Why you running those things on those architecture? It would be cool to understand why. But it's an interesting problem.
Also very curious about that. Looks like, let me see, there's a few more questions. John Wood asked if you are open to contributors.
On the spot, like really. No. We want tons of contributors. And actually, talking about contributors, these lovely people, which is Howard is here representing them, but Engine, these lovely people, they've been with us from day zero. Like even we were building this, and they work with us, lots of feedback, but also very valuable contribution. And the notebook that I'm going to show you is a porting of a project that they built within the scope of the Ocean Mind. And this entire thing has been rebuilt into just a single notebook. But for them to do that, they require to have a way to communicate from C# into back the front end in JavaScript. So what they did was not only to create this entire platform and the libraries I'm going to use, they also contributed back to the Net Interactive what is called the client-side kernel. So at this point means that you can have C# to issue commands back to the front end, which is now behaving as a full kernel. And those commands can be used to do things on UI. In this case, this library is allowing you to parse, and I forgot what AAS stands every time. It's there you go, automatic identification system, which is a bunch of messages that come in, and they are produced by Vessel. And all these messages, they produce different type of data, but you need to be able to aggregate them in order to have a full form message to display. I'm not going to use the live, but I'm going to use a bunch of data that is available. This is all public data published by the Norwegian government. And now what's going to happen is that I can, in this case, as you know, as a Polyglot and interrupt story, I'm going to tell JavaScript that whenever you see one of these commands, I want you to call this method and update the vessel position on my display. Now using plain HTML and a very secret key, which I'm not going to show you. So that's this. I'm going to load Bing Maps. That command is going to handle here that every time I got a fully formed message, it's going to populate this map with vessel moving around Norway. At this point, we go back to C#. We actually declare this command right now on the spot in the notebook. We get hold of the kernel. We register the commands that can be sent to the JS kernel from C#. We build an observable by grouping the information that we need and taking the latest message, converting categories into beautiful colors that I can't read this way. That's a nice thing for visualization. And finally, subscribe. Every time there is a new command, send it off to the JavaScript kernel. Now we kick it off, and this beautiful thing is going to start showing both as they appear, moving across. And as they get updated, you're going to see them moving. And this shows the power where you've got the ability to touch at least 3 languages when you got your C# with observable subscription, all the beauty of RX and the likes, and then you marshal across. And that has been a gigantic contribution that opened up a lot of possibility on top of this that you're gonna totally see unfold in the future. And one thing that we really also encourage people to have a look at is that in this ecosystem, if you're staying within the .NET, there is a bunch of useful. Somebody was talking about machine learning, ML.NET, but there's also a few other things that can be leveraged as NuGet package from FS Lab and Psisharp. If you need advanced numerics, and I think I saw a very beautiful presentation a while ago using some statistical analysis done with F# and the Interactive Book was impressive. And I think that was done using some of those advanced libraries from Psisharp.
Yeah, we
if you want.
Oh,
sorry.
I was going to say we had a question in the chat about Psisharp and talking a bit more about it. We actually had a whole up with the Psisharp folks, and we really want to get them back on as well soon. But I posted the link. I can post it again for the person asking about Psisharp. So you can take a look at that and then ask any specific questions you have. And like I said, we want to have them back on in the near future. But yeah, this is super cool to see.
Well, there are even more cool stuff. So stay tuned. There's more stuff coming in May that builds on top of this functionality in RX and cloud, which is going to be very, very interesting.
Well, that brings me to this question, which Philip asked: is there a release timeline?
John.
So the release timeline, right now we don't have a date picked out. A lot of the experience that you're seeing here is working on top of the notebook APIs and Visual Studio Code, which are themselves not, they're not stable yet. So if you see little glitches sometimes when you're using this, sometimes just restart it. It's a new VS Code update, and we will hopefully have responded in time. So the VS Code experience will take a little bit longer, and then our extension APIs, we're using them, and obviously we have a bunch of partners using them internally and externally. They will only be stable when we've gotten enough feedback on them to say that we believe that they're ready, and we have some other work to do there. So we don't have a date in mind, but things are pretty robust at this point, and things will become the user experience will become a lot more stable once VS Code finalizes their notebook APIs. Awesome. We have generally, and that's one more footnote there as well. We are at this point breaking changes to the contents of your notebook, assuming you're not directly using the .NET Interactive APIs, but you're just you're using your own code. We don't expect further breaking changes there. Now, it's not a final guarantee at this point, but we have like Azure Synapse Spark.NET support uses .NET Interactive, and we have people we don't want to break. They've got notebooks. We don't want to break your notebooks.
Nope. We're not the kind of people. And if you want to play with that, I would kindly put out the same sample I've been running. You can look at this, where it's giving a lot more information about how this whole piece of tech works. Play around. It's pretty cool. It's really cool.
I just posted the link in the chat as well. We got this question about asking if session share, I don't know if they mean live share or session share works. So when I send you a link, you open it and you see the same as I, and we can collaborate. So commenting on this, and also just the best way to collaborate with notebooks and your teams.
Yeah, so my understanding is that the VS Code team will implement live share for notebooks at some point. And then that should just work for us, as well as the Python notebooks, Julia notebooks, all the other notebooks that are in VS Code. You'll be able to use live share with them. That's my understanding.
It is, yeah. The implementation that we are doing is compliant with what, as soon as the API gets stable, is already built by the VS Code folks to be compliant with the live share serialization. If you want to try it. I'm going to tell you that it kind of works, but it's seriously awkward in the sense that you don't see the people editing the cell, but if they hit run, you get it. So you're going to start seeing that your output is not exactly what you wrote in the cell, because you don't see what the other people has done, but it is it's getting there. So clearly, it looks like something we're going to see soon enough as the API gets stable. From our side and their side, everything has been built compliant with the live share interaction model. So the protocol is, it should come almost out of the box when all the pieces reaches a more stable place.
What do you recommend for kind of asynchronous collaboration on notebooks and sharing across the teams?
Well, that one, you can certainly round trip the files. We are working on a story for authentication and secret sharing, right? So one of the things we're investigating there is what is the PowerShell secret management module is one possibility, and that interacts with Azure Active Directory and Key Vault, I believe. So there's problems that we have to solve there. You don't want to share a notebook that's got secrets in it.
Right.
But and then there's things around file format as well. There are tools out there for diffing IPYNB, but it's a JSON based format, so it's a little bit awkward. So there's room for improvement, but it really depends on what's in your notebook, I guess is the answer.
Gotcha. So working on the experience, that makes sense. Another question here from Julie. Since this is all about data, can it be used in Azure Data Studio?
So there are multiple different protocols that you can talk to the .NET Interactive server with. One of them is the Jupyter protocol. You can use, if you go through, and this is on our repo, if you go through the instructions for installing .NET Interactive as a Jupyter kernel, or really as 3 different Jupyter kernels, which is C#, F#, and PowerShell, but you can use all the Polyglot stuff, even in Jupyter front ends using magic commands. If you go through that path, you can run it as a Jupyter kernel inside of Azure Data Studio today. And the SQL functionality that you saw was contributed to us by the Azure Data team, because their customers were asking for a C# and SQL Polyglot experience. So now we're working with them on bringing this sort of richer experience of .NET Interactive back into Azure Data Studio, right? Via this sort of other protocol layer that we have, which supports the Monaco editor, richer IntelliSense, hover text, all these other kinds of things. So the experience will get better, but you can do it today.
Okay,
And
cool.
there is a question from Alexander, about value sharing. So it's asking about if I got a gigabyte of data, when I share between .NET and PowerShell, what does it do? If you're not doing anything awkward, it does exactly what you expect. It makes 4 copies. Redundancy, you only need 1. So the other 3 is for just being safe. But actually, F#, C# and PowerShell being in the same process, when you use those gestures like the share, they share the reference. So if you have loaded a data frame with a gig worth of data as an object or a collection, it could really be, as simple as a list of objects, whatever you want. If it's in F# and you share that with PowerShell, they're actually pointing to the same memory space. So there is no copy beside those 3, 4. It's random, can be even 5, but it's
yeah, so we're about at the end, but I want to ask one more question. So what are some of the dev tests that you imagine people can use notebooks for? So obviously machine learning and data science and data exploration are huge, but what other things do you imagine notebooks would be great for helping out with?
sketching,
Learning,
prototyping, playing around.
documentation.
That thingy, the IoT. So we did quite a few things where we had to share the device. So we were running the engine of the interactive on that thing. And John from Seattle was submitting piece of code to define function needed to use. So actually the notebook was running there, but we had VS Code each, no sharing, but he was able to fix my stuff, add formatters and everything. And I was still using. So the robot was completely autonomous, but he was the interactive kernel that we connected through. John was mentioning the protocol.
Embedded scripting.
Embedded scripting. We had a few interesting example.
Some kind of almost like hot reload kinds of scenarios. If you embed a .NET Interactive kernel inside your app, you can push code into your app while it's running, right? Including resources like JavaScript and HTML.
Yeah, and there was an MVP that did a very cool. He did a presentation where he was crazy enough to embed the .NET Interactive inside an ASP controller, and then he was doing a post with an entire notebook and was executing the whole notebook server side and then get it back with the output.
Wow. Yeah, those are all awesome use cases.
Security.
I was just saying also, like, when there's new language features, being able to just have a playground and test out new language features is one that would be really cool as well.
Yeah, actually, F#5 was available in .NET Interactive before it was available in other channels. It was easier for us to iterate on it there than it was in Visual Studio. And we're interested in trying to get to that same place with C#, but it's a little bit more complicated.
All right. And we use bot framework. We built a bot as the .NET Interactive. We had a bot where you were talking in the chat, and if what you were writing was code, the bot will take it, execute it, and give you back the output.
Yeah.
So we did these things that were in Teams. So we use Teams as a shared IDE, both for the robot, but also we did another one where just submitting code and learning, and that thing was sharing state. So the bot was taking code in, I'll do that for you, and then give back the output.
That's very cool. I'd love to see that. I missed that one.
That's somewhere on YouTube. It's lost, like yes, in the rain.
question about requirements. Are there any requirements to run it on PC?
I'm running it on a Raspberry Pi, like really.
The distinction that's worth calling out there is that the server, the .NET Interactive Global tool, will run anywhere .NET 5 runs.
Yeah.
The libraries, most of the constituent libraries are net standard.
Yeah.
The front end, which we're showing all these demos in, is Visual Studio Code. So the front end will run anywhere Visual Studio Code runs. But then what Diego's saying here is you can have these hybrid deployments because you can connect to a remote kernel. So you could be running Visual Studio Code on your local machine, Linux, Mac, Windows, whatever it is.
Yep.
And connect to a .NET Interactive kernel that's running maybe someplace on a remote machine that maybe doesn't support VS Code, but you don't need it to because you're talking over HTTP.
Or where VS Code is supported, you can use the VS Code remote, which I've done a few times on SSH and code spaces and containers.
Yep.
Having the whole backend there and just the front end on my machine, that was quite convenient a few times.
That is, super awesome. And we are about at the end of time, but go ahead, John, if you have some closing thoughts here.
I was just going to say, I feel like the community is getting some insight into how our teams interact. Like, I feel like every time I hang out with you guys, we're over time, and I'm super excited about notebooks and trying to find ways to empower all of our machine learning and .NET users. I feel like I have a whole dozen questions in directions we could go in terms of how we can leverage notebooks and expose them to our users. So I'll probably follow up with some conversations, and maybe we'll have you guys on again to show off those features once we have them.
Sure. Yeah. And if people have questions, they should just reach out to us, on Twitter or on GitHub.
Yeah, if you go on GitHub, we also got a Discord channel. You find it on the landing page of the repo. So you're welcome to get us there, and Twitter, whatever, it works. A more TensorFlow related question. If you need to satisfy TensorFlow, you need a machine that satisfies your TensorFlow requirement installed. .NET Interactive again, no special source required. But the module you load, they might have some native and hardware requirements that they need to be satisfied.
So use ML.NET. Closing statement.
Just saying, there is a nice person in here that he volunteered for a few things. I'm gonna speak with Jake offline. A few more ML and notebook.
Right. Sweet. Well, thank you both for joining us this week. We'll definitely have you on in the future when we have some more features. Any closing thoughts here that you want to let our users know, our viewers?
No, I'll just say thanks for the invite, and thanks for everyone who
joined.
Lovely. Thanks for your interest and your questions.
Awesome. And we will see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
All right.